My name is John Cornicello, and I welcome you to my series of live interactive photo conversations. You can check out the schedule at cornicello.com/conversations for dates and times of upcoming shows. You can also find links to previous conversations there. Today, my guest is Urs Recher. Urs is the photographic eye of broncolor. He's responsible for the company's advertising, photography, and shares his fascination for light with his professional colleagues around the world who attend seminars, webinars, and workshops. I've been lucky to sit in on 2 of these seminars over the years here in Seattle. Urs helps broncolor develop new products. Now, let me let someone in there. And which he uses virtually every day as part of his studio work. He's the author of a couple of books. One of my favorites is Light Architecture 2, which is now available for purchase as a PDF. And his new book is 50 Light Shapers, which is a free download. And he also is offering a series of online webinars with broncolor. I'll post links to all of those during the conversations. So please welcome Urs Recher.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, how's it going out there?
All fine, thank you. I have a long, hard day of work behind me already. I know for you guys, you probably had just the first coffee. I was shooting a motorbike all day, which was a nightmare the first 2 hours. But after 10:30, 11 o'clock, I got more and more used to the surfaces. So I have a satisfying result at the end of the day, but I'm tired.
It's a challenge with different surfaces, the shinies, the mattes, the tires, and all the crazy stuff on a motorbike.
I used pretty much, I think there were like 1 or 2 pico lights not used. All the rest, I grabbed all the lights I had because there was another dark part here, another dark part there. So it looked like a jungle in the end, my studio, but very satisfying in the end that I could make it work.
Yeah. So there's so much information out on the webs about lighting, and so much of it is wrong. I think you've probably run across that. So what are some of the most common errors or misconceptions you think people have about lighting?
Probably the worst is that there are rules about lighting. So many times I get questions like, I have to shoot portrait, how do I do this? Or how do I shoot a motorbike? And there's just no answer, no simple answer for this. I think if you put your lights in a position and at a power setting that looks nice, then you made everything right. So I don't believe, yes, you just mentioned before, I wrote 2 books, but these books are not like books that I tell you, okay, if you want this, do this, and then it's perfect. What I do as well, all my webinars, the seminars, the books as well, they explain the tool of light. Okay, but for you, right, is a different thing than for me, because you have different aesthetics, different views. So what I do is just explain the tool of light, and it's not my job as a seminar teacher to say what's wrong and what's right. I just explain the tool.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I think a lot of people are confused by diffusion. What does diffusion do? I mean, by definition, it spreads things. It doesn't really soften the light unless you change the size.
That's exactly the key point, yes. If you have a diffusion at a certain distance from a reflector, then you illuminate a bigger area of your diffusion than the opening of the reflector, and this, of course, softens the light. But diffusion itself, let's say if you have a limited light angle from a reflector and you put a diffuser on, this amplifies the light angle. So in the end, you probably have a light angle of like 180 degrees. And this means you have a lot of indirect light. You have much more uncontrolled indirect light via a white ceiling or a white wall, whatever. So it lowers the contrast. And many photographers misunderstand this as softer. But the softness and contrast has nothing to do. So when we explain light, we talk about shadow contrast and shadow definition. Shadow definition is how precise are the shadows. That does every hair have its own shadow on the background behind the object. But it has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with the contrast. I can have a razor sharp shadow, but the contrast is close to 0. Or when I have a softbox very close, it's super, super soft, but the opposite side from the light is completely black. And this is where when I talk about light and somebody tells me, yeah, I would like to have a hard portrait, I really always ask, what are we talking about? Are we talking about high contrast or really sharp shadows?
Exactly. And distance comes into play in so much. I think one of the most important things for people to learn about lighting is how distance affects the light.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you're in close, the light falls off quicker. As you
Yeah.
move back, you get a wider spread and you get more, as they call them, environmental fill or secondary reflections, as you said, from ceilings, floors.
Exactly,
you don't realize the color of the floor can affect the image quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always when I want to find out if somebody understands something about light, I always ask, okay, you bring a softbox from 4 meters to 2 meters, what happens? And everyone knows, oh, it's going to be brighter. Yes, but yes, and it's going to be softer. It's going to be higher in contrast. The reflections will be less dominant. It will create less shine, and so on and so on. So it's the most simple movement to bring a softbox at half the distance or just a little closer. But to really understand what happens if you do this, I think if you really got this, then you understood a lot about lighting.
Yeah, I think seems counterintuitive at first, that bringing a light in closer is going to make it softer, but it's making it larger. It makes it brighter, but you can control the brighter by the exposure.
Exactly. Yes.
That's one of why I like flash, because I can dial the power down easily to what I need.
Exactly. And because if you get closer, as you said, you dial down the power so that the light source, which is, let's say, with a softbox, it's the front diffuser is the light source. It's not about the flash tube. So the front diffuser becomes darker. And what I see reflections in my glasses or in the eyes or even on shiny skin, these reflections, they only depend on the brightness of the light shaper, regardless of the distance. And if the light shaper is darker, the reflections are less dominant. And of course, I compensate this by getting closer, but this is these direct reflections like glasses, eyes, shiny parts, jewelry as well, watches. The reflections on these shiny surfaces, they are completely independent on the distance. So by getting closer, I can go down with the power and I can reduce the aggressivity of these reflections.
Cool. If people in the audience have questions about lighting, feel free to pop them into the chat or raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
One of the things that I found interesting is the details that you learn that seem so small, but are so very important. It's like when I changed over to broncolor, the difference in how flash sync is measured from one brand to another.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak to that a little bit?
When you say flash sync, you talk about flash durations, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, flash duration, yes.
Okay, because flash sync is again another thing. Today we have to talk about HS or high-speed triggering. But talking about flash duration, unfortunately, there are two definitions. Let's say, also the two definitions are TO1. That's the time where the flash has 10% or more of its max energy. So as soon as we reach 10% of the max energy, we start metering this time. Then we reach a max on the flash curve, and then it drops down to the other, again to 10%. And this we call TO1. And broncolor, we actually cut our flashes. So what's coming before and what's coming after TO1, you can actually forget about this. So when I give you a TO1 of 10,000 of a second, you know that all the light is exposed during 1/10,000 of a second. However, marketing-wise, there is a second definition around which is called TO5, and it's the same definition but with 50%. So we wait until the flash has 50% of the max intensity, then we start taking the time, and then we just measure the fancy peak of the flash, and as soon as it drops down to 50% again, we stop metering the time. And what's coming after this TO5 is about 50% of the exposure. So if I give you a TO5 value, I only tell you how long is the fancy part of the flash curve lasting, but you have no reliable information how long is the total exposure. If you put on your camera, let's say a quarter of a second, you don't want something that's a little shorter than half a second and a little shorter than or a little lower than an eighth of a second. You would like that your camera exposes exactly during 1/4 of a second, and we should require the same from our flashes. So that's why at broncolor we always give you the tier 1 value, and that's all the light. So you can be sure that if you have a fast moving object, dance or wind in the model's hair or whatever, and you expose it with a 10,000th of a flash, 10,000th of a second tier 1, you know that is all the light, and this is the reason for absolutely sharp photograph. There's one more thing. Let's say probably you give the speed of your car, you give it in miles per hour. I give you the speed of my car in kilometers per hour. But we can easily convert it. But there's no conversion rate between tier 1 and tier 5. So if you want to make sure that it really works, either you ask for tier 1 value if you trust your supplier, or you just make a test shooting, because there's no fixed factor between the two values, unfortunately.
Yeah, and while talking about stopping motion, we should probably mention high-speed sync, which is really designed for working outdoors to balance the sunlight at wide open apertures. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really stop motion. It actually makes the flash appear as a continuous light source. Is that correct?
Exactly. It's the camera that makes the motion stop in the end. But the problem is high-speed sync. Also for me, it's I get a lot of questions. I work in the studio with a dancer, and I use HSS or HS, and it doesn't work. It's nonsense. So really, HS or high-speed synchronization is an outdoor thing. And you just said it absolutely correct, John. It's the motivation to use it is to go outside. You would like to underexpose daylight, probably, and at the same time, you would like to open the aperture. And this sooner or later requires that we work with a shutter speed shorter than the shortest shutter speed on the camera, so shorter than the 250th of a second. And let's say if we work at a 250th of a second, what happens is that the first curtain opens, zack, flash, and then the second curtain closes. If we are shorter than this, what happens is that the first curtain opens a little bit, and then the second curtain follows. So we are actually scanning the photograph. We are actually scanning the scene on our chip. And if you use a scan camera, flash is the last you would like to use. Okay, so we need a continuous flash. We need continuous light. And that's why we do the opposite from what you expect. If you work with HS triggering, we are firing the flash before the shutter starts opening. So we fire the flash now, and then we extend the flash duration long enough that we can actually scroll down or scan down the entire photograph. Disadvantage, most of the chip is actually covered by the curtains. So it's a terrible loss of energy. So when you work with HS, most of the time you end up working at power 10 or 9, because most of the, as I said, most of the energy is actually hit or is destroyed by the curtains. However, if you work in the studio and you would like to freeze a fast moving object or a fast moving model, I definitely recommend not use HS, but to work with short flash durations, because then the camera opens and bam, super short flash impulse, and this exposes the entire shot at the same moment, and then the camera closes. Okay, so it's first of all the light hits the sensor, and the entire picture is exposed at the same moment. So it's not like that the top of the photograph is scanned at a different moment than the last pixel. And if you really have a very fast movement, this can create some distortion in the photograph, which is of course looking very, very strange in the end. Mm-hmm. So it's really the only motivation to use HS is to go outdoors if you want to open the aperture and still underexpose available light.
Cool. Can you use, I used to use high-speed sync with my Canon cameras. Can you use it with Hasselblad digital?
You don't have to, because Hasselblad has a center shutter. They don't have these scan shutters. So this is more for mirrorless cameras, electronic shutters, DSLRs. They have these curtain shutters. However, the Hasselblad is the shutter of the
leaf
Hasselblad
shutter.
is like a leaf shutter is like a second aperture. So it can be that if you are working with a long flash duration, so let's say 500 of a second, and on your Hasselblad you choose 800 of a second. Of course, the shutter is smaller, shorter than the exposure time or the flash duration of your flash. So of course you cut some of the light as well, but it's an even cut. You might have a little bit of vignette, how is it called? Vignetting, thank you, at the corners, but it's not that we have a dominant light fall off. But in the end, if the synchronization is fast enough, you are allowed to use all the shutter speeds with your Hasselblad and flash, because it works differently.
Cool. Another thing that comes up is positioning the light and feathering it. You know, a lot of people starting out point the light directly at the subject, but they learn feathering. And can you explain the feathering, or do you have another term for it?
No, probably you're better with English words than I am. But you're right, I almost never have the light straight to the object. I remember 100 years ago when I was in education, my boss told me when my softbox was not aiming directly to the object, you know, he complained that you're not working carefully, blah, blah, blah. So, but I think it's really nonsense to aim or to think, again, thinking in rules. It would be completely wrong to say it's a rule that we always aim with a light shaper, no matter what it is, always to the object. Because most of the time, I think personally that where the light fades away, we call this the edge transfer. You know, we have light shapers which have a very sharp edge transfer, like projecting attachments. Then we have light shapers like the balloon, which has no edge transfer at all. And softbox, they have a very soft edge transfer, so that the light slowly fades away. We have a light angle of 180 degrees, but behind the softbox, obviously there's no light. So sooner or later, the light fades away. And personally, I think that most of the time, to use this light at the edge of the light shape is much more interesting. And most of the time it saves you as well some money, because if you're not aiming to the object directly, but you aim a little bit further away, you have plenty of light there to recycle with a fill board, for example.
Right, that's going to be another question there, is the placement of fill cards. What do you tell people to do?
For those that want a thumb rule, if you're standing behind the camera and you can't touch it, it's wrong. Okay. Why? Let's say we have a beautiful main light coming from the right, and then what do photographers do? It's too dark on this side, so they take a fill board and put it on the left. And this is like a slap in the face from the other side. You feel this light, right? So it's like, the main light comes from here, and then you put a white wall on the other side. First of all, it
lights up the ear.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like a main light here, and then bam from the other side, very unpleasant. And there's another disadvantage. For example, this part here, just the left of my nose, obviously won't get any main light because the nose is in the way. And if the fill-in light comes from the other side as well, my cheek is actually blocking here as well some of the light. So I will still have a dark shadow here. Same problem if I don't work, what is this, a blouse? Yeah.
Shirt, t-shirt?
No, a shirt, yeah. with color. I don't really work this on a daily basis, but if you do, you have some three-dimensionality here in the shot. And if the light comes from here, it makes a shadow on that side of the color. And if you fill in too far from the other side, you get another shadow. So we get twin shadows ending up in a black triangle down here. So that's why most of the time, again, there are exceptions for the rules, I keep the fill board or any fill-in light close to the camera, because this light infiltrates everything. It goes here, it goes into my shirt, into the color of my shirt. When I shoot a group, it reaches everyone. And that's the job of a fill-in light. I don't want to see the fill-in light. I don't want to see, there's a white wall somewhere in the set. It's just a technical thing to be able to lower the contrast. And the light of fill-in may go to the light side and to the shadows, because then it just brightens up everything a little bit, but the natural or the original gradations, the original shape of my object is not destroyed.
Mm-hmm. What about the distance from the subject to a fill card?
Depends on the contrast.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, talk about the distance again. If I think it's too much filling, I rather take it behind the camera. If I think I need more filling that, I bring it closer. So I never take it to the side. Okay.
Exactly.
So it's more or less just always next to my picture angle, closer, lower contrast, further away, higher contrast, obviously, but I never put it on an angle too far
Mm-hmm.
away. Otherwise, sooner or later, I start feeling it and seeing it again.
Yeah. What about silver or gold on reflectors?
Then it becomes even more important that they stay close with me, with the camera. Normally, I don't use them, to be honest.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's just white cardboard. But why not? If you really want to have a lot of reflection, or if you want to give the shadows a little bit of a warm tone, why not using a nicely textured cardboard? I think it's important that this gold or silver is slightly textured. Otherwise, we have just a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously whatever we set up, we double the light source. But of course, it's stronger. It's stronger than just a white cardboard. But most of the time, white cardboards in different sizes do the job. But I think that there must not be something wrong with the more aggressive reflectors as long as you keep them close to you.
Great. Let's see, what else was I thinking about?
Can I
What's
ask,
the difference? Yeah, please.
again, probably a little bit more specific. Are there ways of using a para that are something that you have learned over time that are not so obvious? Some specific way of using it or setting up or whatever?
And maybe start with the description of the para.
Yes, as a para, of course, is a never-ending story. It's a very complex light shaper. It's the para is straight, I think pretty much straightforward if you use it focused, because then it's like a huge spot, and then it's quite easy to understand. I use it in this situation mainly for outdoor fashion sets. I think it's a mistake to, if you have a beautiful set somewhere on a beach or up in the mountains, and you have to illuminate the scene somehow, and you put there an octabox. And the octaboxes, they have a light angle of 180 degrees. They have double diffuser, so they actually destroy, in a way, a lot of light, which means you have to put it relatively close if you want to have a chance to deal with the sun. But if you're close with the light shaper close to the set, this means that the light fall off is very, very fast. So close to the softbox, just out of the picture angle, you have probably a far overexposed floor or environment. And right after the model, there's no more light at all because the light falls off too fast. So what can we do against this? We put the light shaper further away. We put the light shaper at 10 or 15 meters. But what happens with the softbox? There's no light left on the spot. So if I want to do this, I put a focusable light shaper, like for example the para, far away, and I do focus it, which means the lamp head goes into the reflector. Then because the para is a parabola, the light leaves the reflector more or less parallel and doesn't get lost that fast over the distance. Okay, so I can easily illuminate quite a large scene, 4 or 5 meters, with almost the same f-stop. So that's a huge advantage of using the para focused. And then defocused, it becomes really complex. First of all, I think the easiest way, if you're new into para or if you want to understand the light of para, what you have to do is always go to the object or model position and look back. And then look into the para and see where is it reflecting, where's the light coming from. And then you will see the distance. For example, if you go very close to the para, that these reflections, they move towards the inside of the para. So you're not using the entire size of your beautiful reflector. If you're too far away, the reflections, they are falling out of the reflector. Okay, so you have to refocus a little bit. I would say that to have it perfectly defocused, you have to have the model at more or less the diameter of the para. If you bring her closer, you can do it, but then you're not using the entire size of your light shaper, which means the lights gets a little bit harder and less three-dimensional. And if you take the model further away, the reflections are actually not hitting her or him anymore, and that's of course very bad news. What a lot of even experienced para users don't know is that if you want to create a side light, let's say if you just you have the para behind your camera symmetrically, and if you would like to give the light a certain direction, you don't have to move the entire para to the right or to the left. You just tilt it a little bit. By tilting it a little bit or feathering again, so we are back there, by feathering again it a little bit, these reflections here on my right side, they would fall out of the reflector, so they are inactive. And these reflections on this side, they would become a little bit more brighter because they are reflected on a larger area. So by just feathering the para a few degrees left or right, you can give the light a little bit of direction. And it's the same if you think, okay, it's too, let's say you work in a low studio and you can't take the para too high or high enough to achieve normal or nice looking gradations on the chin, under the nose. So you don't have to, let's say, buy another studio or change the location. You just tilt para up a little bit. Okay, this means that the reflections at the lower end of the para become inactive and it becomes more dominant from the top. So by just working very carefully with a few degrees left, right, up, down, you can change the areas of the para reflecting light. And this is nothing else than moving the light sources, because it's not, the light source is not the flash tube. The light sources are the reflecting parts of the reflector. So again, distance, of course, and as well, very careful, work very carefully with the angle, especially in defocus situation, because there you don't see the light really dominant. If it's focused, it's bam, it's a spot, you see it. But if you defocus it, the light gets lost a little bit. And there, if you really want to understand what you're doing, go to the model position, look back, and try to figure out where are the most dominant reflections in my para. Is it reflecting at all? Is the model's position correct? And so on and so on.
I don't know if you're as frustrated as I am with all these products now called parabolic that are not parabolic in shape. I mean, it's like one of the most overused terms out there right now. Jeff, yes. You got your hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
So how do you pronounce his first name?
Urs.
Urs, okay. Because I've known several Swiss people and they all sound, they have weird names. But no, that's fine. I just wanted to compliment you and complain. First of all, I downloaded the PDF because I like to multitask. So the Lighting School PDF, and your table of contents gave me a fucking flashback.
Okay.
I went to school at RIT, and we had always had a lot of really good lighting equipment, all the studios and everything. I believe at the time that I was there, they had one of the first hazy lights, which was kind of, you know, the archetypical, if you were going to shoot food, you'd have a hazy light and you backlight it, you know, wrap the light around the food. But one of the things that I learned, how I learned about lighting, was we had to do a ring around. And basically it was in the studio, we had to pick an object, and then we had to light it from 3 different lights, a point source or hard light, a soft light, and then a diffused kind of non-directional light, like a real soft bounce light. We had to light it from the front, from the back, from the side, left, right. I mean, literally. So your table of contents in the PDF looks exactly like the ring around, because we had to actually make little prints and put it on this little diagram so that you could see exactly what the effect of the lighting was by doing backlighting, front lighting, side lighting, with fill, no fill, different lighting ratios, you know, fill ratio. And the reason it's causing me flashbacks is that that kind of stuff, it did me a lot of good in terms of learning how to light things, but it was such tedious kind of at the time I thought it was just busy work, but I really think taking an object and having somebody light it in a lot of different ways so that they can compare what light effect has on wrapping and reflectance and edging and all those things. So I would recommend everybody go ahead and download and get that PDF, because, and then the other thing that I love about broncolor is that remarkable types of light modifications. I never bought broncolor. I had CNR, so I was kind of in the family, but I went with Balcar because they also had a lot of interesting light modifiers. What I would do is I would take a look through the broncolor catalog, and then I would make my own shit. I had my own kind of hazy light that I built from scratch. What you were talking about in terms of flash duration, I thought was very interesting. I had forgotten the two different kind of basic ways of determining flash duration. But the way I would do flash duration is that I would just take, Speedotron used to make these quad heads, 4 flash tubes in a single head. And then I would rent these, and I would take 4 of those quad heads and put it in my 4x4 softbox, and then basically split the flash tubes to the point where the actual flash duration was very short. It was in excess of 10,000th of a second. And that's how I did a lot of freeze motion. But
flashes and the like.
Yeah. And that's something that you can do if you have a pack. You can split the head and get basically cut the duration in half. But then, you know, if you cut it in half 4 times, it's 1/4. If you cut it in 8 times, it's 1/8. So getting to 1/10,000th of a second takes a lot of fucking heads. But anyway, I wanted to. Yeah, because Speedotron was what, 1/300th or 2/50th
like
of a
that.
second
Yeah.
on their 2400 pack.
Yeah, I mean, the other solution is you take the right pack and you just dial in 1/10,000th of a second.
Yeah, well,
of course, you know, in my eyes, plan A.
Yes.
Well, I never could understand why broncolor was so fucking expensive.
Yeah, because it's best.
Control. But we won't go into the brands.
You know,
Jeff,
really,
I have a question for Jeff. Was each one of those quad heads plugged into a separate pack, or were they all plugged into the same pack?
If I remember correctly, each quad head was plugged into its own pack. So it was actually 2 quad heads were plugged into one pack.
actually,
Yeah, there's 4 cables
broncolor
coming out.
is not expensive because you only buy it once and it lasts forever. And that's probably bad for the company because then you don't have to go back and buy stuff every few years. But I have another question. I've done this before with ballet dancers where I've done multiple exposures, multiple flashes within an exposure, and it's come out great with the move. And but I don't remember I don't do it that often. And so my question is there an easy way to figure out your needed exposure based on the number of flashes that you want to get in a motion, like a ballet dancer?
You mean the required flash duration?
Duration, or are you going for exposure?
So if I want 6 positions shown in one exposure, so I'm going to have the move pop 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an easy way to figure out what your exposure should be on the camera compared to the number of flashes you're going to have?
Multiply your ISO by 6.
No, but I want to hear it from Urs.
Okay, so so you want to take independent shots.
Independent shots in one frame.
Are there any overlap in the
one
subject?
frame?
Correct.
Okay, in one frame, if it's in one frame and the model dislocates.
Model would be standing in one spot, let's say, but doing a motion, bringing her leg above her head or whatever the case may be. So,
yes, okay. The answer is not very simple. If, let's say, the arm, if she does a movement with the arm like this, so the arm is exposed here, bam, 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 bam. So there's no adding up of exposure, because you have one arm here and one arm here and one arm there, okay? However, if the rest of the body is standing still, number one, very tricky to get the rest sharp, okay? Because you will have a tiny movement as well on the face. And personally, I don't like these kind of stroboscopic effects too much, because it looks great on the leg, but then you have a multiple blurred exposure on the rest of the body. However, on the rest of the body, of course, the light adds up. So 2 flashes is 1 more f-stop, 4 flashes, 2 more f-stops, 8 flashes, 3 more f-stops, 16 flashes, 4 more f-stops. So so the second flash does the most to it, and then it's less and less and less and less. Okay, but most of the time when I do stroboscopic effects, I just take a single shot with 1 flash at a given position, and then I personally take care that the object or the model moves away fast enough that we have tiny overlappings, that I really don't have 8 exposures of the body not really moving very fast. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, and you're right, it's complicated.
Right.
I see Michael's trying to zoom in there.
Always.
So another question is white versus silver beauty dish, or the beauty dish versus the soft light reflector and the broncolor line. What's the difference between them?
It's the inner coating. Also, honestly, I think the names are just wrong. But so the silver one is called P soft reflector, and the white one is called beauty dish. The beauty dish has a white inner covering. So I don't know if you are familiar with the shape of a beauty dish. It's when here's the lamp head. First it goes rather flat and then round at the edges. Okay, so it's not a parabolic reflector that's shaped like that. It's first flat and then it goes like that. So if you look again from the model's position into the reflector, the center of the reflector is rather dark because it has a counter reflector as well, and then it's just flat going in a more or less a right angle away from the light source. There's not a lot of reflection, and it only reflects at the edges. So if you look into the P soft reflector from the model's position, you see like a huge ring flash, okay? But the light chamber is relatively big, let's say some 50 centimeters in diameter, but the center is dark. So we only have we have a very limited area of the reflector. It's actually illuminated, and this makes the light harder. And it's like a ring flash, okay? And if you bring this too far from the side, you get twin shadows, because the one curve of the beauty of the P soft reflector is giving one shadow, and the second curve is giving me a second shadow. So it's wonderful because it has some crispness in the light to work out the skin texture of a model. But in my eyes, you have to watch out that you don't take it too far away from the camera. Otherwise, you get twin shadows of the nose. And that's one of the few rules that I actually try to follow in my portraitures, or generally in my photography. I would like to have one shadow in my photographs. Okay, I think that the quality of a photograph is not depending on the number of shadows you see. Sometimes in fashion photography, I think it is like this, but in my eyes, it's not like that. So P-soft reflector, great, beautiful texture for the skin, and a lot of crispness, a lot of life in the skin, but watch out for multiple shadows. The beauty dish, that's the same, exactly the same reflector, same shape, but it's covered white inside, which means even if the reflective angle is not correct, it's still reflecting some of the light. So when you look at the beauty dish from the model's position, it's more like a circular softbox. So the light is softer. The entire reflector is filled with light, which means no twin shadows. On the other hand, so it's easier going. It's easier to handle. You're not running into the problems to have disturbing twin shadows. On the other hand, you can say it's more boring, okay, because it doesn't work out the skin texture so nicely. Most of the time it's like this. The more interesting a light shaper is, the more you can make wrong. If you just go for diffused light via a white ceiling, you can't make anything wrong, but is it interesting? I think it's not, okay? So the more specific a light shaper, the more interesting it is, if you know how to use it. And it's pretty much the same here as the beauty dish, the white one, easier going, less reflections, less makeup required, less skin texture, but maybe a little flatter. And the other one is really the crispy one. If you have beautiful skin, beautiful model with makeup, you would like to work out the texture of the lips, of the eyes and everything. So go for the P-soft reflector, the silver one. But in my eyes, don't put it too far away from the camera.
Okay. And don't ruin it by putting a diffuser on it.
And the diffuser is not completely, the optical density of the diffuser is not too high. Mm-hmm. So it's not like closing, like a softbox, for example. So you can do it, let's say, if it's really hot and your model is sweating and you don't have the time to do the makeup and say everything, you can soften the light and get rid of some of the reflections, of course, using a diffuser, but don't expect the light to be as interesting as before.
Great. One of the things you explained well in light architecture, it took me a while to understand, was strip softboxes, horizontal versus vertical. Mm-hmm. You've got an illustration there of a hotel room.
Yes.
With a thin curtain, which finally got that to me. So if you want to talk a little bit about the direction of a strip light.
Yes, probably we have to start again with diffusion. Diffusion does not make the light soft. That's the first thing we have to understand. So the strip light softbox is about 30 centimeters wide and can be up to 2 meters long. And it's not really a softbox because, let's say, if it's vertical, so left, right, it's only, let's say, the size of a normal reflector. So it is as hard as a normal reflector. However, on the vertical, it's maybe it's 2 meters, or our longest one is 1.80 meters. And there, of course, it's very, very soft. So it depends a lot if you have it vertically or horizontally. If you use it on a portrait and you have it vertically, what can you expect? You can expect relatively soft shadows in the vertical direction. So you probably won't need any fill-in light under my chin. I have plenty of light under my nose, in my eyes. So it's a very soft light vertically. But my nose will throw a crazy shadow over here. The shadow will look like the shadow of a spotlight, like a normal reflector. So you probably will have to fill in from the opposite side. And the light fall off as well. So you have light, and then all of a sudden, bam, it turns into black. So the transfer from the lit area to the black area will be very, very fast. So it's not like a nice, smooth gradation, a nice three-dimensional light traveling around my face. It will be rather harsh. Mm-hmm. If you use it horizontally, it's exactly the opposite. So let's say, like, how can I make it? Let me grab this one. Okay, so we have something horizontally. so it's very narrow, let's say vertically. So what you expect is dark shadows and harsh shadows under the chin, under the nose. Probably I have to fill in the areas just under my eyebrows. But I will have a very nice and soft gradation around the face, no disturbing nose shadow. And as well a very nice gradation from a very bright skin, slightly darker, 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 darker. So a nice long gradation around the face. And I pay this with rather harsh shadows below my chin and my nose. And of course, you can do intermediate positions as well, but it's two completely different light characteristics if you use it horizontally or vertically, depending on the size of the softbox in the corresponding direction. Rather, if it's very hard in one direction and soft in the other one.
Yeah. Is there a big difference between using a strip box and heavily feathering, like a 2x3 becomes a strip when you feather it? Is there a big difference?
To a native strip?
Yeah.
Yes, there is, because if it's a native strip, the light goes just probably straight onto the model. And if you feather it, then sooner or later, depends how far you feather it, the model sooner or later is moved into the edge transfer of the light shaper.
Okay.
And that's, in my eyes, that's the most interesting position. Let's say I use this iPad for this. So let's say the iPad now is illuminating me directly. So it's light, dark. If I start feathering it away, sooner or later, my ears are behind the softbox. So my face is coming out of the dark into the light and then fades away again on the other side. And of course, even so, it looks in the eyes, it looks like a strip light, because if the softbox, let's say from your position, the softbox is just looks like a strip light like this. It's not the large area, it's just a very narrow one. So it looks exactly like a strip light, but the light characteristic is completely different because it shows this nice light fall off.
Great. And by showing that, you showed that by feathering the light actually makes the light smaller in relationship to the subject along one direction.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Often people say, oh, I feather the light to make it softer. And I say, no.
It's the opposite. No, if you feather it, softboxes, yeah, I mean, it depends on the subjective size of the light shaper as seen from the model. And this softbox for you guys is definitely bigger than this one. So it's very clear. And it's always the same. If you feather it away, you lose light, so you have to increase the power. If you increase the power, the front diffuser becomes brighter and it starts to shine again a little bit more. So by feathering the light softbox away, the softbox becomes harder and more aggressive, but more three-dimensional. So it's like what I said before, it's more tricky to handle, but much more interesting.
So on soft boxes, I'm thinking of the softbox C versus the EM, the lip versus no lip around them. Do you have a preference there, or what should people look for when they're working with those different types of softboxes?
Okay, number one, we don't have EMs and Cs for at least 5-6 years anymore.
Shows you how old my equipment is.
Yeah, exactly. You should change them. Right now we have the Cs only, yeah. Also those that were the Cs before, so we don't have these flaps. Of course, as you said at the introduction, I'm kind of responsible for the light shapes at Braun, and I think it makes a lot of sense not to have these flaps anymore. These flaps, they are effective if you have a very narrow softbox. Let's say you have a strip light shaped softbox, a very narrow one, and then these flaps, they really allow you to direct the light a little bit. But imagine you have a softbox of let's say 1 square meter, 100 by 100, and then these little bit of flaps left and right, they limit the light angle from 180 degrees maybe to 170 degrees. So I don't really care about that. Disadvantage of the flaps, if you start feathering, if you have a Pulsaflex C or just a softbox that ends with the front diffuser, if you feather it away, the light becomes slowly less. It's a continuous gradation. However, if sooner or later these flaps start working, all of a sudden you get a black line, you get a black line down the face. Okay, so these feathering techniques are much easier and much, the degradation is much softer if the front diffuser is the last element of the softbox.
Great. Question that I had, a lot of people that are just doing home studio things don't use the lights every day, sometimes goes months between. What's the best practices for the capacitors and for the batteries if it's a battery powered strobe?
Yes, for the capacitors, it's it's not a big deal. Keep the batteries, keep the capacitors dry and not hot. Also, if you live in Miami, or I don't know, now it's humid, probably hot everywhere in the States, what I hear. But if you live in the South, in New Orleans, in Miami, don't keep them dry and cold. Okay, so you don't have to, obviously not, you don't have to put them in the fridge, but just put them in a, that they can't, that they don't get humid, the capacitors, otherwise they can be harmed. But beside this, even if you put the capacitor away during a year, during 2 years, this is not harming the capacitors in any way. The capacitors don't like to work, so the only way that they're aging is if you really give them a hard time by charging them and fire them empty. So that's what the capacitors do not like. But if you know that you're not using them, just put them away cool and dry, and they're fine. Batteries is a different story. Try to keep the charge of the batteries between 50% and 80%. The worst, of course, is completely empty. So if they are completely empty and you don't recharge them, they die sooner or later, or they really lose a lot of capacity. On the other hand, if you always go to 100% charge, the battery doesn't like it either. So if possible, if you have the possibility, keep them between 50% and 80%. That's the official recommendation from broncolor, and then your battery lives the longest possible way. Don't put them on a metallic surface, even if the contacts are on the other side, on the top. There are always some micro currents that can discharge the battery. So put them on a non-conducting surface. Keep them, let's say if you have Cirrus batteries, keep them with a 2, or they have a 3 charge indicator. Charge them in a way that the 2 of the lights are on, so they have like a 2/3, 66%. That's perfectly between the 50 and the 80%.
Great. Do you have any information about storing the batteries in the flash head or separately?
Separately. Separately, because even if the flash head is off, the connections are there, and there are constantly some micro currents that discharge the battery. Of course, it's super slowly, but if you don't use them for a couple of months, that's absolutely enough to discharge them completely. And this is definitely not good for the batteries. So if you don't need them, take them out, charge them. At the beginning, you can as well charge them to 100%, because then slowly they will lose the charge, and then between 80 and 50% they are happy, and then if they go below 50, you might recharge them again, but take them out of the unit for sure.
Yeah. If you're getting started, or you have recommendations to someone's getting started in lighting, do you have a go-to first and second modifier that you would suggest people to start working with?
Of course, the first question is always, what do you want to shoot? Or do you want to go to still life photography, whatever, fashion photography? Nevertheless, I definitely have an idea what's the best way to start with, and I would definitely recommend to go, let's say, with 3 heads. This can absolutely be 3 Cirrus heads. In this situation, I would recommend that you mix the power of your heads, that you're not going for 3 400s or 3 800s, that maybe you take 1 800 and 2 400s, because this gives you more variation range over, from the max power of an 800 to the minimum power of a 400. You just have more possibility to choose your power. And almost never I use more than 1 head on full power. So it's really just more flexibility. And then light shaper wise, I would say if you go for 2 or 3 soft boxes, normal reflector and grids, then you can do a lot. Okay, you can't do everything, but you can do a lot. You have diffused, you can take everything away, bare bulb indirectly, you have a diffused light. You can work with the soft boxes, so we have a soft light. You can start to practice with the feathering techniques of soft boxes. You have a normal reflector for backgrounds. You can put the honeycomb grids on the normal reflector, so you have a spot. You start combining them. So 3 heads, 2 normal reflector, 1 set of grids, 2 soft boxes. That's if you really are on a level, on a photography level, that this equipment does not offer you anything new, you're very good anyway, and then you know what is your next tool that you have to invest in. But I think that's the basic equipment. Just today again, I was using tons of soft boxes. I had a diffuser to have a normal reflector behind the diffuser. So basically a super complex shot. I was not using anything fancy. Yes, there was 1 para, but just because there was nothing else left in the studio, but this could have been a soft box as well. So just a couple of soft boxes, a spot here, a spot there. So this equipment is so extremely versatile. You just have to be very open-minded to play with distances, angles, feathering, and so on. But this is really the basic equipment that I think you should own. And from there on, you learn a lot about light, and then you go into the more specific light shapers.
Mm-hmm. Have any words about umbrellas?
No.
Okay.
Also, don't use them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Very, very honest, straightforward. Umbrellas, use them if you shoot weddings and you just want to travel with 1, let's say, battery operated Zeros. You just need a little bit of soft feeling close from the camera. There you can take an umbrella. It's a little bit maybe less costly than a soft box, and it fits probably in your back pocket. So from the handling, maybe it's easier. But if you go to the studio and they would like to start light shaping with an umbrella, forget it. Okay, everything we discussed about if you angle the light or if you feather the light away, that it becomes a little bit more 3-dimensional, that we can create a gradation. With umbrellas, you only run into problems. If you start feathering an umbrella, then you get direct light from the flash tube on the background as well in your lens. So you have to run around with black flags and so on. So my recommendation is really maybe take 1 big white umbrella if it has to go fast. Just to you have a lot of ambient light and you just need a little bit of a fill-in. Nothing wrong about this. But if you're serious about light shaping in the studio, go for soft boxes.
Great. Well, we're at an hour here. I don't know if people have more questions or.
I have one when you brought up diffusion. I know there's like 3 different diffusers for the para.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that using diffusion on the para would defeat the purpose of the para, or why would you use them?
It's still okay in my eyes. It's subjective view, of course. I think it's absolutely okay if you use diffuser number 1 and 2, because diffuser number 1 and 2 you can look through. So most of the light is still doesn't lose the para characteristic of the 3-dimensionality and everything. However, if you put on diffuser number 3, it converts your para in a perfectly round but too expensive softbox. Okay, so diffuser 3, if you have it already, why not? Because you get the perfect circular highlights in the eyes and so on. But you're absolutely right, it destroys the light characteristic of a para. However, the para, it's exactly one of these light shapers, what I described before. It's super aggressive and super interesting. So you have to know what you're doing. And if you do not have it 100% under control, let's say you don't have the time to work carefully on the makeup or to work very carefully on the position, on the angles, because probably you shoot the celebrity and they give you exactly 2 minutes of their time. So you don't have the time to practice and test shot and test shot. And in this situation, you might want to take the compromise and put on diffuser number 1 or 2. So you lose a little bit of the speciality of the light. It's a little bit less interesting, less crispy at the end, but you're on the safe side, on the safer side. Use diffusers mainly on the big paras, on the 177 and on the 222, because they have a very aggressive or a very shiny reflector, so they actually can be too aggressive. So diffusers are, I use personally the diffusers only on the big paras. However, the small paras, the 88 and the 133, they have a much more textured surface. So there I actually don't need the diffusers because there's always a certain amount of diffusion already in the light. On the other hand, I always have grids with me when I work with the small paras because I have there's always somewhat more light spread uncontrolled in different directions. So if I want to focus the light with the small paras, I take the grids. However, I don't need the grids on the big one, okay? Because the big one, if I focus it, the light, bam, comes out parallel. And if the light comes out parallel of a reflector, I don't need grids anymore. What for, okay? So I use diffusers for the big paras and grids for the small ones.
Great. Jeff, did you have a hand up again or is it still up?
Yeah, I had my hand up. I did have a question about the, when I sold my studio and moved into my new space, I got rid of almost all my strobe equipment. I still have a few packs and heads, but then bought into the whole LED thing. And I've really enjoyed playing with LED lighting. It's continuous light, so you can see things, unlike a strobe with model light relationship, which is always a little bit problematic, but particularly as it relates to multiple light setups and ratios and matching the model light output to the strobe output. But I noticed that broncolor now does have a LED in F160. I can't quite see what the actual lux output is on it. But I presume that all the modifiers fit on the head. And the one thing I wanted to ask is dialing down output of LED lighting and the impact on the color rendering index. Do you have any information on that?
Yes, I have. Dialing the light down has no influence on the CRI nor TLCI. So the color reproduction values remain exactly the same. Within brackets, I always use LED on 9 or 10, but not for color rendering issues. Like for example, HMI, really the color is not always constant if you go down with HMIs. So it's definitely not an issue with the LEDs. To give you an idea about the power, so the 160 watts doesn't sound like a lot, but this is just the power going into the lamp head. What's coming out of it can be compared to 650 watts tungsten, if this means something to you. And lumen-wise, on full power, we have 13,800 lumen. Honestly, I only know this because I was asked yesterday, and I didn't know yesterday during the webinar, so somebody told me, now I know it. It doesn't tell anything to me. I have no idea how much light this is, but I know it from the shootings. I can easily shoot with, if I go with the ISO to 400, I can easily shoot with a 400 of a second. I have to cheat a little bit on the sensitivity, but so maybe I don't take a medium format camera for this. Maybe I take my Sony or my Nikon on location. I can open the aperture a little bit, but it's absolutely sufficient. As long as I have a slightly reduced environmental illumination. So if the sun is out, I'm lost, done. Okay, I can switch on my LED or not, it's the same. I won't see it. But any indoor location or outdoor and you hide in the shadow a little bit, you can easily control the light.
I have a question.
Yep.
Yes, Michael.
if you haven't used the power pack in a very long time, what do you advise to?
We actually talked about that while you were offline, but we can go over it quickly again.
Yeah.
Okay, power packs they have no problems being not used over time. Store them dry and cool, but you don't have to use them once in a month, or you don't have to charge them to a specific level, like batteries, for example. Anyway, if you put the power pack away, it discharges internally anyway, and after a couple of minutes, your capacitors are completely empty. So it doesn't make sense to fire one flash every month, you know, because 3 minutes later it will be empty again. So no problem to not use power packs, just don't store them in hot, wet environment.
But what do you do to recharge them once they're kaput?
Once they're kaput?
Yeah.
What a beautiful English word. Because I understand it perfectly.
English or Yiddish?
A kaput is German, I don't know.
Kaput is a dialect of German. It's Yiddish.
Okay. That's what I thought.
It's not even a dialect, it's just a normal German. Even in Swiss German, like kaput, you know, when it's kaput, it's broken.
Like it's like the word verfallen, you know.
This is what I don't get.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, what was the question? What do you do?
I don't remember.
All the capacitors die if you don't use them for 6 months or a year. Or
No.
10 years.
No. That's no time. That's not even a long time for a capacitor yet. A long time if you don't use it for 5 years, 6 years, and then maybe don't put it at 10 for the first flash. Maybe you just let them heat up. Like if you go jogging, you don't start with a sprint. So just do the same with your capacitors. Flash them a couple of times on reduced power. But then, as I said, time is not harming capacitors.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Cool.
What about the age of flash tubes?
The aging of flash tubes depends. There are two types of aging. If you use them, they look very bad. If you use them on low power setting, really, let's say below 10 joules, in a way that they can never really heat up properly. That's not good for the flash tube either. What happens if you look at the flash tube, left and right, it has an electrode, and with every flash, there's a little bit of these electrodes evaporating. And now in winter, if you make this in winter to a window, the humidity from your breath actually makes the glass wet, right? And the same happens with a flash tube. So the evaporated electrodes, they can the metal gets stuck to the inside of the flash tube, and that's when they become a little black, almost like black at the edges. If you realize this early enough, put it on high power and heat the flash tube up, really. Put it on full power, program a sequence of 50 flashes and really heat it up, because then this evaporated metal can go back to the electrodes. But if you realize it's too late, you're done, okay? And the other thing is, of course, if you shoot architecture or you shoot furniture, you have to constantly on tail and bam, 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 bam. Then it's just a normal aging of your flash tube. And then they don't really turn black at the edges. They just turn a little bit like grayish, okay? And then sooner or later, it's time to change them. You won't detect a large color temperature shift. Just sooner or later, it will die. So you don't have to, if you don't see anything in your photograph, there's no reason to replace it. But when you see that they are, let's say, really grayish at the two sides, make sure that you have a spare one ready, if ever.
Now, wait a minute. Are you specifically addressing this for broncolor, or is that all major flash tubes in general?
I can talk for us, of course. I think it's physics. I think, but I don't know. I mean, maybe other flashes don't even have this problem, because we can go down to 2 joules. You know, we have a 10f of the power range, and we have, even at the very low power, we have still a high firing current. We have a high voltage to fire constantly, that the color remains the same, and that the flash output, the quantity of light remains the same. And I can't speak about other brands. Maybe they're not going that low, so they always get a hot flash tube. So maybe they have not the problem of these evaporating electrodes.
I can speak about Balcar. That
Yes.
was also a problem with Balcar. That if you use the heads dialed way down a lot, as opposed to firing full power, the ends of the U-tube would actually end up getting kind of black. And it's been my experience that once that happens, there's nothing you can do about it. But
Jeff, are you talking about the actual tube itself?
yeah, the tube itself.
Yeah.
Balcar has a U-tube, and at the base where the electrode goes into the head and the little trigger wire goes around it, the base would get black.
Exactly.
You know, and it would also lose output efficiency. In other words, new tubes were always higher output than older tubes. And it was my experience that new tubes were also cooler, that old tubes tended to get a little warmer.
But that's not good, but it's not broncolor, so I understand.
And just so people understand, joules and watt seconds are basically the same thing. It's the power coming into the flash unit. I'm just going to put up an image here with the URLs for the light architecture book and for the 50 modifiers, so people can copy them down. They're also in the chat.
Yeah, show the table of contents. It's a wonderful visual.
I don't have it on this computer.
Oh, you want me to?
Yeah, if you got it. Let me just set you up. So while Jeff's bringing that up, Urs, do you have any words for people that you wanted to say, or anything you wanted to talk about?
No, I've been talking a lot the last hour. No,
this has been great. I've really enjoyed this.
I'm fascinated by the picture that's behind you.
My dancer, yes, it's reflecting a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I went to your website and I saw it there also.
Okay.
It really, it's beautiful. I question the I don't know how to answer or question this. What's happening to her that's causing the powder to come from her back?
That's my assistant throwing flour onto the set.
Okay. Okay.
So this is
because it almost looks like she's being shot from the back.
No. This is a flower that falls out of her hair. And this one is actually thrown by hand.
I think it's beautiful. It really is. I love it. You know,
so Jeff's showing the table of contents from the
even though it's in black and white.
Exactly.
It works. It really does.
So the table of contents is what gave me the flashback to my ring around that we had to do as a class assignment at RIT. It really gives you, and these are all different light sources and light modifiers, but it really gives you an idea. And an egg, I didn't use an egg, but an egg is a perfect object to use because it's like a matte white, and you can really see the effect of the lighting. So Urs,
Urs, yes.
Urs, you had to shoot all these?
Yes, it was never, honestly, it was never planned as an ebook. It was, I shot this during the last week before Christmas because I was one of the few guys working at broncolor, and I felt that I need some connection again to shoot more. And we had a couple of new light shapers. So I just started with 2 or 3 of these eggs, and then I went to the next, to the next, to the next, and then I ended up with 51 in the end. So we used 50 of them for the book. But it was 3 days of work. And funny enough, the question, I started posting them on my Instagram just a couple of days ago. And obviously the most important question about this seems to be, how the hell did I put the egg on this table that it's not falling? Because sometimes in the shadow, you see that there's no shadow from any support or whatever. So this seems to be, this seems to bother photographers more than how did I light it.
It's called
I love this one.
It's called mortician's wax. Put a little dab underneath it.
No, it's not actually. It's just a cardboard which is a little soft. So I just pressed my finger on it. I made a very tiny little hole in it, and then this was already stable enough for the egg. The problem was just to walk around the table without ever touching the table, otherwise it would fall. And I really didn't want the camera nor the egg to move, not even a millimeter.
So you had room to back up and make light sources smaller. When I did this, I actually went out and bought small little desk lights because I couldn't get far enough away to make the light source small enough to finish testing it. I don't remember who told me to do the egg thing, but it's been, when I very first started, somebody, years and years ago, when I first picked up a camera, they said, you got to do the egg thing. And they showed me some, and so I did it. But my problem was getting different sizes of light. I mean, I could get closer and farther away, but I couldn't get far enough away with a regular light. So I bought a little light that was about that big around. It really helped.
Yeah, exactly.
I wish the eggs had a little nose on them, just a little tiny plastic nose.
So a non-broncolor question, but related somewhat. What Hasselblad do you shoot, and what is your most often used lens in the studio for people?
I shoot with a H6050, and I do 95% with the 120 macro, which is definitely for me the lens for everything. For motorbikes like today, for close-up, for normal portraits, for fashion, for nudes. The 120 macro is an amazing lens, and it does everything.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you, Urs.
Would mention the one lens I don't own.
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah.
Now I'll be looking up prices on it in a minute. I'm going to get so hurt.
So does anyone have any last minute questions for Urs or comments about lighting? It's getting to be late in the evening over in Switzerland. We'll let you go get some rest.
Sounds
I know
good.
you had a long day today.
And thank you for doing this. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for all your time and for listening to us. Thanks,
Come
John.
back sometime and show some of your pictures.
Absolutely.
You mean you want me now to show you some pictures?
And we'll come back
Next
another
time.
day.
Oh, next time. Okay, good.
Yeah.
No, certainly we can do this. Yes.
Urs, where are you located?
I'm located very close to Basel. That's the northernmost city of Switzerland. My house where I'm right now, I'm 200 meters from the French border and about 5 kilometers from the German border.
Cool. It's like the
I'm gonna
best of
put
both
this
worlds.
live stream on Facebook.
Yes, but when I go to work, I cross the border 4 times a day, because the shortest place, the shortest way for me to go to work is to go to France and back to Switzerland, and then the way back. So I actually cross the border 4 times a day.
Do they ever question you?
Twice in 20 years, something like this. No, there's nobody there.
Very cool. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.